Please, on behalf of RUSI, can I say thank you all for coming and welcome to what is the annual Trenchard Memorial Lecture. Just a few points of admin before I introduce Sir Stephen and he stands up to speak. I have just done it on my phone, so if you could please do it on yours, turn it off so it doesn't make a noise. And if there is a fire, the RUSI staff will lead us out of here in a suitable way. It's down, I suggest. The rules of engagement for today are pretty standard. Stephen's address will be prepared marks and they will be on the record, but once we begin the question and answer discussion, those will be off the record and without attribution, please. I'd also like to acknowledge Hugh Trenchard, the third Viscount, is here today. Hugh, thank you for coming. It's somewhat appropriate that you should be here on what is all well, I don't know how many we've had. I'm sure there hasn't been 100 memorial lectures, but we of course approach the Air Force's centenary, and I know that Lord Trenchard will be very much a part of those because of clearly where he sits in the history of the service. So thank you for coming, Hugh. And now, without much further ado, to Sir Stephen, Air Chief Marshal, Sir Stephen Hillier. Stephen is the 31st Chief of the Air Staff, if Wikipedia is correct. And unless my maths fails me, we are there or thereabouts on his 100th day in office. So it's not just Mrs. May that's having to reflect on the first period. So Stephen has had 100 days really to think about where he's going to put the service. And of course, he finds himself 18 months away from our centenary, which I know will be much on his mind, but not just because of the celebrations that will rightly be taking place, but also because of where the service needs to think about where it puts itself for the next 100 years. Stephen finds himself in charge of an Air Force that is busy, probably as busy as it's ever been, certainly in my living memory, and he and I joined more or less the same time, so we've both seen it in all its glory. But he also finds an Air Force about to take delivery of fifth generation capability, not just in terms of the obvious aeroplane that we'll talk about in the press, but all the things that surround that and what that means for a service that needs to think about how it will operate in the new brave world that it finds itself. And of course in an Air Force that is a third of the size it was when he and I joined it. So some challenges there. Stephen himself has a distinguished history. His biography is in the pack. His command at 2-star was ASC2 Group, so he saw the air transport fleet and the I-Star fleet at its busiest period of time, and we'll know acutely how much they have done over the last few years. But his last appointment prior to taking over as chief was as DCDS military capability, where I think it is fair to say that Sir Stephen was the architect of the 2015 SDSR, and he had to do some hard graft and a good 4+ years in fulfilling that duty, which I don't think has scarred him too much. But he will clearly bring a wealth of understanding as to how the plan was brought out, what the strategy is behind it, and what that means for him and the service, particularly in terms of how the money will be cut and where he'll be able to spend it. He finds himself taking over service where Typhoons are currently in Japan, the Red Arrows are in China, and half of the Air Force is parked in Akrotiri fighting against the Daesh in Iraq and Syria. So Stephen, I know, is off to the Far East shortly to go and have some of those engagements on the back of some of those. But he now is about to deliver an RF strategy, which will somehow bring all those threads together. And I know Sir Stephen will be talking about some of his intent in his speech today. And he will be focusing on what that means for the service, but more importantly, what it means for his people. I think if Lord Trenchard was listening in on us today, he would very much hope that that was very much at our forefront, because it was very much at the centre of his understanding of what he had to do when he brought the service into life all those years ago. Without further ado, Sir Stephen.
Well, my lord, ladies and gentlemen, Greg, thank you for that introduction. 105 days to be precise since I took over, but this is definitely a privilege to be here to share with you some of my thoughts this afternoon. Now, as you all know, this institution's been at the forefront of defence and security thinking since its foundation as the Naval and Military Library Museum in 1831. It stimulated and maintained a most vigorous military membership who saw in it a forum, the only forum, where military policy could be discussed and questioned amongst fellow professionals, regardless of rank or title. This afternoon, 185 years later, I'm delighted to be sustaining that professional environment by by delivering the 2016 Lord Trenchard Memorial Lecture. Now, when Lord Trenchard outlined his detailed plans for the formation of the Royal Air Force in 1918, he was very careful to ensure that this new fighting service learned as much as it could from the experiences of its older siblings. But he also realized that his fighting service would be new and exciting, and that its focus would need to be firmly on its future, cognizant of its roots, but always thoughtful about where it was going. Today, that's exactly what I'm going to talk to you about. The still new and still very exciting Royal Air Force that I have the tremendous privilege now to take and lead into its second century. Now, as Greg said, almost a year ago, the outcome of the Strategic Defence and Security Review tasked the Royal Air Force significantly to grow its capability again. Something I really don't think we've had the opportunity to do for generations. It did so not because it was me who was the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff for Military Capability at the time, but because the utility of air and space power in helping the nation to meet its 21st century defence and security challenges is very well recognised and understood. That manifests itself in a consistently high demand signal for our outputs. The Royal Air Force has rarely been busier on operations. Today, every force I have is committed to operations. Our personnel are in 25 countries, spread across 4 and sometimes all 5 continents, and engaged in more than 15 concurrent operations right now. And those operations are very much live. Be that in the skies over Iraq and Syria, or from here in the UK, or indeed in projecting UK air power and influence rapidly and globally, as we're doing in East Asia at the moment. But supplying the air power to meet that high demand signal and simultaneously growing our capability isn't easy and requires us to adapt. And so in this lecture, I want to explore some of the innovation and initiatives the Royal Air Force will need to pursue in order to successfully manage that change. It's not some revolutionary transformation, but it's a continuation of the adaptation and flexibility which defines us as an organisation. Let me start then by looking at the context, because I think the situation faced by the Royal Air Force today is in many ways rather enviable. The operational demand for our capabilities is consistently high, and our ability to apply air power at the tactical level on operations is widely acknowledged to be world-leading. Our front line is planned to grow in a way that, again, as I say, we've not seen for generations. We have a talented and highly motivated workforce, which would be the envy of any organisation. We have a strong reputation, not least for our safety culture and as a service which delivers successfully, without fuss, on operations and in the business space. And our approaching 100th anniversary provides us with a unique opportunity to reinforce the service's traditions and its ethos. But within these strengths also lie our vulnerabilities and risks. How do we sustain such a high level of operational output for as long as it takes? How do we harness the innovation and realize the people and financial efficiency gains necessary to grow the front line? How do we recruit, train and sustain the people we need and give them the levels of challenge and responsibility which they seek? And how do we ensure that our good reputation and our license to operate do not unravel through poor safety risk judgments or an inability to navigate our way through financial pressures? These are difficult questions to answer, and the challenges they set do not come at us individually. They're overlapping and they're interconnected, and they demand a coherent and coordinated response. So let me start to address these issues and challenges by explaining our approach. Firstly, I don't believe that we need to change how we deliver air power at the tactical level at least in the short term. That's our considerable strength. It's the foundation of our professional reputation, and it's something we must constantly seek to support and to reinforce. Op Shader, the UK's contribution to the operations against Daesh, is a constant daily reminder of who we are, what we do, and what we are for. I'm tremendously proud of the professionalism, energy, and commitment of the whole force of the Royal Air Force to that operation. Every day, the ISTAR force is providing 30 to 40% of the coalition's total ISTAR output. And the Typhoon and Tornado forces and our remotely operated Reaper force have conducted approaching 1,100 strikes in the 2 years since we commenced offensive operations. I can then add to this picture of tactical excellence all of our air defence missions in the South Atlantic, over the Baltic states, against potential rogue airliners entering UK airspace, or in response to Russian Federation aircraft testing our national air defence resilience, something that now happens around 10 times annually, and as we've seen as recently as last week. And the vital support which our air transport, air refuelling support helicopter forces provide. There's effectively no operation or exercise in defence which doesn't have a huge dependency on their vital capabilities. Our excellence in this practical delivery of air power cannot and will not change. It is what defines us, as I say. But in looking at our wider, perhaps I would describe them as supporting issues, not least addressing the people challenge, I believe we must act now and give ourselves a better chance of success as we look to the future. We should firstly recognise that the operational tempo that we're experiencing now is not a temporary phenomenon. It will be enduring, and we need to configure ourselves accordingly. We need to question every aspect of our requirements and how we currently do our business. In so many ways, we really do need to consider how can we make our problems easier to solve. And we too often see our challenges as being only supply side. In other words, how can we meet that target without applying equal rigour to the demand side right from the start? As I say, can we make it easier for ourselves? Then we must find these financial and manpower efficiencies from within in order to create the sufficient headroom in which to grow. And this requires us to be prepared to take hard decisions and to take measured risks and to give us that headroom to pursue alternative solutions. We must, of course, and this is not just me in my previous job speaking here, we must ensure our plans are truly realistic, affordable, and deliverable. We must learn from others. We are unique as an organisation sometimes. We are unique within defence in some respects, and there's not a one-size-fits-all. But most of what we do has easily transferable lessons which can be brought in from outside. And we must be prepared for that as part of being an innovative organisation. What all this says to me is the Royal Air Force must be prepared to seize the unique opportunities now in front of it. It can do so by living up to its headlines and our ethos of being agile, adaptable, and capable. Those are enduring. But perhaps now we must also add innovative and imaginative. Let me now turn to our aiming points. The strategic goals of Joint Force 2025 announced in last year's review are already well defined. But let me briefly recap the headlines because they really do underline an important point. In the combat fleets, we will form 2 additional Typhoon squadrons, buy 138 F-35, and we plan to create an additional F-35 squadron by 2023, operating from the carriers or from land bases. The RAS planned fast jet squadrons will increase by 50% as a result. And then we'll look not just 5th generation, but to 6th generation and develop an unmanned combat air system demonstrator. In the ISR fleets, we will replace Reaper and double its fleet size with the Protector RPAS. To those who still question me and say, what are you going to do about unmanned? I will say, look at where we are now. Look at where we were a decade ago and look at where we're going. We're buying 9 Boeing P-8 Poseidon aircraft. We're going to upgrade the E-3. We'll extend it in service till 2035. Expand the Shadow and Rivet Joint fleets. Extend their service. And expanding crews in both cases. And we're going to improve our space surveillance network and develop a high-altitude pseudo-satellite capability. And in the air mobility fleets, we will complete the introduction of the Atlas and the Voyager. We have adapted one Voyager for the VVIP transport role, upgrade our C-130s, extend them in service, enhance the C-17, and upgrade the Chinook. I could go on, but hopefully the message is clear. This is a huge opportunity, but it's also in equal measure a big challenge. The purpose is to give the UK a greater ability to fight in the information age and a greater ability to undertake the most difficult missions across the spectrum of potential conflict alongside our NATO and other allies. And this recapitalisation effort has been ongoing since 2010, but it will mean that most of our new equipment will be in service until at least 2040. That's why we must get it right today, because if we don't, we will be living the consequences for years to come. What's vitally important also is that I believe we must be well advanced in delivering these goals and in growing the Royal Air Force over the next 5 years. That's partly because we need these extra capabilities for our operational commitments right now. But it's also because if we're not progressing strongly on the growth path set out in 2015, then it comes to SDSR 2020, then we can hardly expect to attract further new investment in the Royal Air Force. We just need to deliver. But that 3 to 5 year timeline and the intense practical focus it implies has to be at the core of our growth strategy. But we must also think beyond pure force structure delivery and more about the sort of Royal Air Force we wish to be in 2025 and beyond. We need an Air Force which matches that outstanding tactical delivery of air power with its thinking lifted also to the operational level, and with its future command and control capabilities developed accordingly. The stand-up of our new Joint Air Operations Centre at High Wycombe is one example of our thinking in this area. It will provide the Air C2 capacity and capability to execute national missions in isolation or with other joint headquarters and allied partners. It will be able to support the UK's Joint Force Air Component Commanders operations, live or exercise, up to medium scale. And in time, it may also offer the UK an increasingly capable, centralised Air C2 capability, providing an alternative to deployment of forces. And this is an important point, because I think that the idea that our C2 always needs to be close to our deployed forces does not feel entirely consistent now with the information age. We also need to recognise that the operational environment is changing. Our freedom to operate in the air environment is not going to be as it was. And we can talk, I'm sure, more in questions about anti-access and area denial. We must have a better understanding of how our new air power capabilities will be integrated and operated, either in the air environment or across domains, not least in space and cyber, as part of future joint and combined operations. That places connectivity and integration of information capabilities at the heart of our future. In all of this, time is and increasingly will be of the essence. So our processes, not least our acquisition process, will need to keep up, especially for information capabilities. That's one of the reasons we're establishing a Rapid Capability Office within Headquarters Air Command. Its purpose is to drive innovation and capability delivery. And it will do so by harnessing the extraordinary and diverse intellect that already exists within defence and our partners, and by exploiting commercial off-the-shelf technologies and its military off-the-shelf equivalent. Through rapid controlled testing, the RCO will also allow us to fail fast, learn, and move innovative capability enhancements forward quickly. And I see this initiative as very much complementary to the defence innovation work. And I look forward to developing proposals which allow us to tap into the significant funding stream which as defence has created to develop new approaches to our capability challenges. And certainly in my thinking in the SDSR last year is by creating a fund of approximately £1 billion over 10 years. That to me sounds like powerful incentivisation. But in all of this, there's a risk that we get preoccupied by the technology and use our equipment plan and our force structure as a metaphor for the RAF we want to be in the future. Now, please don't get me wrong. The technology is vital for maintaining our operational advantage. But as others catch up with us, we also need to hold on to that other vital part of our decisive edge, our people and their training. For it is their superb individual and collective skill, professionalism, commitment, self-discipline and judgment which sets them apart from others. And we need to protect that in equal measure to our technical capabilities. That's one of the reasons why I say that there's currently nothing more important to the senior leadership of the Royal Air Force than addressing the people aspects of our strategy. So let me outline that people challenge. Overall, the outcome of SDSR is that I need more people than I have at the moment. But perhaps as importantly, a higher aggregate level of skills across the RAF than before. More proportionally, aircrew, engineers, and intelligence analysts, to name but a few. I don't need to tell this audience that these skills are in high demand. So we will need to work harder than ever to recruit and to attract. We have a good package to offer. We offer challenge, excitement, opportunity, responsibility, variety. As the adverts in our current recruitment campaign say, it's no ordinary job. But the competition for good people is becoming ever more fierce. We also need to ensure we recruit a truly diverse range of people. Not just for the sake of meeting a target, but because only by drawing on the diversity of the British population will we ensure that we have the different range of talents and perspectives that we need. We need those different talents to become an organisation fit for the challenges of the 21st century, flexible and adaptable, making the most of what everyone can contribute to the service. And we are making progress through an intelligent recruiting initiative which exploits geographical demographics and known recruiting opportunities. Female and ethnic minority recruiting is up by 76% and 100% respectively. And 2 weeks ago, I'm proud to say that the RAF won a National Diversity Award for our recent successes in recruiting. We must also make it as easy as possible to join the RAF in general. Sounds obvious. But we need to lessen constraints on how we recruit and employ the force. We need to make balanced risk judgments accordingly. We must make the process seamless and respect that the priorities of today's youth are perhaps different from earlier generations. We will need to be flexible. We need to make the most of a pool of talent which is currently almost entirely untapped across the services. Those who've left to pursue other challenges, but who may now wish to return. Why not? This is what industry does on a daily basis. And perhaps in the future people will be able to move in and out of the armed forces as part of a portfolio career, as easily as they currently move between private sector employers. And perhaps industry colleagues would wish to explore such opportunities with us, because I very much sense that the benefits could work both ways. But once again, we cannot see this purely a supply problem. We must also address the demand side, ensuring that we rigorously examine our requirements and exploit technology, again, to give ourselves the best prospects of success. We need to consider how we train. Training is vital, but we need to ensure that we spend only the time in training that we need to in order to maximize the time that we spend on the front line. And thereafter, we must keep our people for as long as possible. For the RAF, it's typically around 16 years at the moment, which is excellent. but retention is becoming ever more difficult. Sustaining a high operational tempo must be done with an appropriate balance if our people are not to be burnt out. And what we must also really do is realise the huge potential of all the people in the Royal Air Force. The quality is already superb. Any organisation would envy us for the skills and commitment of our whole force of regulars, reserves, civil service and contractors. It's certainly a challenge realising all this potential, but in many ways, what a great challenge to have. And finally, we need to do better with our infrastructure, which is both an operational and a people issue. We need to seek to recover the RAF's previously high reputation and work towards an estate which we own, which is smaller and more efficient, and allow us to better target the investment we're prepared to make. As I say, meeting these strategic workforce challenges is my highest priority. Easy to say, but hard to deliver against. The work has started, and it will not be enough simply to keep running our current models in the hope that somehow by turning up the volume, that will succeed. And it's definitely not simply a case of asking everyone to work harder. We cannot meet these challenges alone. We will work in close cooperation and with a sense of shared endeavour with the rest of Defence, our international partners and industry, and to ensure that we can deliver the highest quality outcomes. Let me conclude now by saying that the RAF that I now have the privilege to lead is doing extremely well. We are in very high demand and we're planned to grow. Our challenge is simple: to meet those operational demands, seize the opportunity for growth which has been presented to us. But success or failure in that endeavour will depend primarily on our ability to meet those strategic workforce challenges. So as I say, we must energise our processes, change where necessary, focus on opportunity as much as risk to give ourselves the best prospects of success. This has been very much a personal view, and so let me finish by offering you my personal ambition for my next 3 years in command of the Royal Air Force. 3 things: to lead the Royal Air Force well and ensure that we deliver the air power that UK Defence needs on operations. To grow the Royal Air Force for that first time in generations. And to recruit, sustain, train and retain the people that the Royal Air Force needs for its second century. Now finally, having got this far, you might reasonably be asking yourselves, where does this all fit into a Trenchard Memorial Lecture? Where is the connection between the father of the Royal Air Force and what me, his successor, precisely 30 Chiefs of the Air Staff later, is planning? Well, as the RAF now moves towards that second century, I recognise that my challenges are not precisely the same as Lord Trenchard's. But I rather hope that he would see the connections. For in outlining in 1919 his principles for the permanent organisation of the RAF, he spoke about the following. He said, "Concentrate on providing for the needs of the moment, but on laying the foundations for the most highly trained and efficient force. Service squadrons at the minimum level essential. Concentrate the whole of the remainder of our resources on officers and men and training. Secure economy in the forces. Highlighting the importance of the reserves, the extreme importance of training and of research, and the necessity for large capital outlay on accommodation. Perhaps most importantly of all, though, the majority of his words in that statement he made in 1919 were reserved for how to recruit, train, qualify, and imbue officers and men with the spirit of the airmen and of the new service, a spirit of the new and of innovation and imagination. So as the RAF moves now towards its second century, I rather hope that Trenchard would have approved of the emphasis that we continue to give in just those areas to keep sustaining the RAF of today. And with our strong roots in the past, but still young and forward-looking, we grow the RAF of tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed.